Hello, I'm Father Jimmy Murray, and this is the history of Rosemount. And I hope to share with you the story of our culture, our environment, and our heritage. And through that, to invite you to engage in that story. Good morning. Welcome to Kill Cemetery. Local history is part of our own personal history. There's names and places that resonate with all of us. But this is one of the older places in the parish that we can all have a link to. So many of our ancestors are buried here. This was an old monastic site, Kill Kiffer Iocra, called after the monk or priest Fiacra, the church of the monk or priest Fiacra. Now that had been anglicised into Kilcrumrera, and that's what it's been known as since. Why did they build a monastery here? For three reasons. Number one, there's a barra here behind me. It's an old pagan burial place. It was sacred and recognised as such. There's also the Tumdu River, and so it would be useful for any large group living to have water and facilities to have a mill. And then there is the Esker. The Esker was the highway, the place where you got the road, where you got access to other places. So three reasons why they built it here. What was the monastery like? Well, it was like all the monasteries at the time. It had an abbot in charge. It was a place where they had the beehive huts, that's what they lived in. They had their monastery facilities here. Three things they dreaded: war, fire, or wind. Now, there were local tribes who could attack them. The Vikings raided it. Wind could destroy it because those were round huts of clay and wattle, and they were very vulnerable. But the monastic scene was a busy scene. It was a place of prayer, it was a place of work, it was a place of silence. It was also at that time a place of refuge. There were no prisons that time. So people escaping whatever law there was came here. People came here on pilgrimage. So it was quite busy. And as well as that, the monks had land here. You have the glebe here. That was the monastic land, about 180 acres. People gathered round here to live round it because there was so much business going on. They were very skilled people at farming, the monks would have been. They developed that, and the locals participated in that. They also, again, participated in the life of the monastery in as far as they could, because it was a centre of prayer and a centre of work. From the 7th to 8th century there were great centuries in monastic life, the golden age of the church at that time. Then the Vikings came, they interrupted them quite a bit. In 1152, the Synod of Kells decided that the abbot would be the parish priest. And so this has been the centre of the parish for hundreds of years after that, the abbot being the parish priest. Then you had the dissolution of the monasteries, which was a very painful period for them in the 1540s. And it really finished the monastery as such. They survived here. And the Steve Blooms, that area there had 17 monasteries. This was one of those monasteries. So it was very special. What was the monastery like? First of all, it would have been larger than this, because when the graveyard was enclosed, it confined it very much. So, but it was still a small foundations. It was a place where there was those round beehive huts where the monks lived. They had their workshops, they had their scriptorium. It was a place then of prayer, it was a place then of fasting, it was a place of work, it was a place of silence, it was a place of refuge. It was also a place where people came on pilgrimage. So it was very, very special to the people of the area. There are two mausoleums here where the McGagans of Ballybrickogue are buried. The largest one is where the McGagan family is buried, and in a smaller one beside the end of the church, Bishop Owen McGagan who was parish priest of Kilcumrera from 1744 to 1778, is laid to rest. There are 93 inscribed headstones, but hundreds of more graves. The oldest of these was of Catherine Haruglin, who died in 1691. The oldest person recorded here is David Bell, who died in 1806 at the age of 106. He lived through 3 centuries. 2 priests are buried here, Father McNamee and Father O'Leary. The last person buried here was Patrick Carney, who was buried here on the 3rd of April, 1964. In the 1870s, graveyards were enclosed as a result of the Sanitary Act passed in 1866. You're welcome to the home of the McGagans in Rosemount. The McGagans were one of the great Irish clans, descendants of Niall of the 9 hostages. The McGagans were one of the great Irish families. They were scholars, musicians, poets, historians, churchmen and politicians. They ruled the area from Moat to Terrell's Pass and from Ushna to Durra. They were one of the great strong Irish clans in the 12th and 13th century. And with the Anglo-Norman invasion, they became one of the clans to fight the Normans constantly. They were always at war with them, and they kept them at bay from this area for most of that time. Following the flight of the Earls, they went abroad to join the French and Spanish armies, and there they rose in the rank of those armies. Prior to the Cromwellian invasion in 1653, the Cromwellian settlement deprived them of much of their lands. They had 25,000 acres up to then, and they ended up with 3,000 acres. Some of them went abroad, some were deported to Connacht. And following that, the 14 Irish families had smaller and smaller amounts of land. The Rosemount McGagans were still quite strong, and they were the ones who kept up that tradition of the McGagan brilliance. There were 14 Irish families on the McGagans. The McGagans of Rosemount were probably the more famous ones. Owen fought for King James and left Ireland after the Treaty of Limerick. In 1763, Richard was head of the Rosemount household of the McGagans. He had 4 in family: Owen, Brian, Francis, and a daughter, Eleanor. In 1773, Owen built the beautiful Georgian mansion here, which he called Rosemount House. The name Rosemount gradually replaced the name Kilcumrera as the name of the parish. The first written reference to it is in Dr. Plunkett's diary when he wrote in 1793, "This day I stayed in Rosemount." Brian McGagan used the name Rosemount in his will in 1802. In 1772, Owen married Theresa Macaulay. They had a daughter, Mary Bridget, who married Sir Richard Nagle. And Mary Bridget and Sir Richard gave the site of the present church and school to Rosemount. The last of the McGagans of Rosemount are buried in Kill Cemetery. There are 2 mausoleums there, one of them for the bishop, Bishop Owen McGagan, who was parish priest of Rosemount from 1744 to 1778. The other is belonging to the McGagan family. The motto on the crest of the McGagans is "Always ready to serve." And that would be a nice and appropriate motto for the parish, and it would encapsulate the spirit of the place. Larwick Castle was one of the McGagans' most impressive fortresses. In its heyday, it must have been imposing, as it stands 3 stories high, close to the Esker Highway and overlooking the local area. It is a silent witness to a history that still captures the imagination. Fragments of it are all that remain. From 1400 to 1600, following the decline of the Anglo-Norman power, the native Irish lords began to assert their authority. Larwick Castle was probably built around 1500. We know little of its story, but Thomas, who owned it in 1592, died at that time. His son Hugh came to age in 1610, and the last occupier was Conla Boy McGeoghegan. He is reputed to have sold the castle and 300 acres of land for leather money. This consisted of pieces of leather stamped like a coin. The circulation of these was afterwards suppressed, and the McGeogans of Lara were reduced to poverty. The Mass Rock is a symbol of the faith of a people during centuries of poverty and persecution. After the suppression of the monasteries and churches, there was a series of wars, plantations, evictions, and resistance. Following the Cromwellian plantation, there was what might be described as ethnic cleansing. Some 2.5 million acres were confiscated, and following the Act of Settlement, some 54,000 Irish joined foreign armies. Following the penal laws in 1697, the practice of religion of the people was outlawed in many places. Mass was said secretly in locations marked by what was called the Mass Rock. The rock in this parish is located at Kilmurra. The Eskers are a system of winding ridges of fine sands and gravel running in an east-west direction and varying in height from 10 to 30 metres. Much of the Midlands is covered with these eskers. They are high and dry and provide ideal routes for roads. In Rosemount, there is a series of these eskers. The main Dublin to Galway road once passed through the area following the route of the esker. The Kilcumrera monastery was close to it, as was the village of Bala. The esker ran near to the site of the present church of Rosemount, and the church and cemetery are located on the spur of an esker. This explains the presence of the fine sands that are a feature of the burial ground there. Bala village is situated on the old Dublin to Galway road. It consisted of a church, schoolhouse, and 21 dwelling houses. Presuming there was an average of 5 persons in each house, then there was a population of over 100 in the village. There were tenants of the Boyd Rochfords. After the era of the Mass Rock, which ended about 1730, a small church, 24 metres by 8 metres, was built there. Most of the heads of households were the tradespeople, and among the trades that flourished there was the blacksmith, the nailer, the wheelwright, the shoemaker, and the publican. Some were farmers. The transfer of the church to Ballybrickogue in 1845 and the upheavals of the famine was the death knell of Bala. In the 1950s, Father Malachy Lynham, who was a missionary in the Argentine, came across a man who sang a ballad about the evictions from Bala. And the ballad goes something like this. My mother knelt at the New Road cross, and the peelers stood around. She cursed the day they were forced to go from the lovely Bala ground. The bailiff said that they must leave and say goodbye to their native kill. We'll see no more the silent hill, the lovely hill near Coolator. After centuries in Kill, and then moving to the Mass Rock, and then to Bala, the centre of church life finally ended up here in Rosemount. Rosemount Church was opened officially Christmas Day, 1845. It was a huge structure. At that time it wasn't finished, of course. There wouldn't have been seating or a proper floor, but that was provided for gradually. But it became the focal point of the life of the parish then at that stage. It was very welcome. It was so much bigger than the small hut they had previous to that. And the first burial here then was in 1877, of a young boy who died. That's the first grave here. So from that on, this became not just the church, but it was the cemetery surrounding it as well, was part of church life. As you come in, down at the gateway, opposite the gate, there are sheds there. They were the stables for the horses. And I remember a lot of horses being tied there when people were at Mass. They came in their horses and their carts and traps, unyoked them, the horse, and then tied them in the stable during Mass. That was part of the story of the past and the story of things as they changed. People then got bicycles and they got cars, but the church here still goes on. Nearly every rural parish had its Mass paths, shortcuts that people took on their way to Mass. At that time, of course, up to the 1950s and 60s, a lot of people wouldn't have bicycles even, and certainly they wouldn't have cars. Here we have a Mass path here going right across the hill to the far side of the hill to Coolator. Now, that path crossed through Carroll's land, Connell's land, Grennan's land, Welch's land, Murray's land, and Daly's land. And those farmers facilitated those people on their journey by building stiles and maintaining stiles, so they made it safe and easy crossing from one farm to the other. There was never a problem with that. All that has changed now. This is a replica of those times, the Mass path that was. The crossroads was a meeting place for people long ago. They weren't in a hurry, they stood and talked. Here at this crossroads here, many a summer's evening I saw people assemble, sit down on stones around and play cards. That was their recreation. It was local and it was fun as well. Up above that on the left, there was Fallon's Forge. Had a great reputation. The Fallons had a forge there and in Myvockley, and the evidence of their good work is all the old gates for the Coolator estate were made by the Fallons, and they stand today as witness to the skills of those people. The oldest written reference we have to Nacosta is in the Annals of Clonmacnoise in 1362. It reads, Connacosta, home of schools. In the late Bronze Age, there was a thriving community in the area. The earliest known graveyard in the parish is situated on top of Nacosta. It overlooks the parish being 204 metres high. On the top is that Bronze Age cemetery dating from about 700 to 500 BC. It is about 60 metres in diameter. In 1932, it was excavated by a team from Harvard University. The cemetery is what is known as a cemetery cairn. This term is applied to a mound of stones placed over and around prehistorical burial places. It contains a number of cisted graves. A cist was formed by digging a hole in the ground and lining it with stones. There are 44 on Connacosta. 40 were cremations and 4 were inhumations. Pots, knives, a dagger, brooch and food vessels were found there and would indicate that they were wealthy, cultured and a religious people. It is said that after the Tónbo Cúilne, Maeve's soldiers came to this sacred hill to recover from their wounds. It is now a place of pilgrimage. I'm standing here at a wall which marked the boundary to the old primary school built in 1864. This school was built following the demise of the old school at Bala. At this stage, Bala as a village was gone, and the population had shifted towards Rosemount. That school was to serve the community until 1936, when the new school down the road was built. After that, it was used as a community hall for plays, dramas. A lot of activities took place here, and it served the public here up to 1977, when the new community hall was built. Rosemount GAA. Gaelic football and hurling have been described as the defining ritual in rural Irish life. Rosemount GAA was established in 1924. At that time, it didn't have its own grounds, but people were willing to give them a field for games. Its sustained growth as a club highlighted the need to acquire its own grounds. It would be 1935 before it acquired its own grounds, and it now became an important focal point in the parish. It attracted participants and spectators. Activities associated with the GAA soon came into being. There was ladies' football, camogie, score, scorn and og, and a dramatic society. The club has had great success down the years, and it continues to develop its facilities. An extra pitch has been provided, and there is a playground for children, and stands have been built to accommodate spectators. The most recent development was the GAA Social Initiative, which was President McAleese's idea and proposed for the benefit of retired GAA members. This is now well established in the club. The community centre was opened on the grounds in 1978, and this has been an enormous benefit to the whole parish. In the background here are cocks of hay. Very few of you would see them made now, but they were part and parcel of all the farmers' lives in the past. That's how fodder was made. And it's a skill in itself. It's hard work. It was done without any machinery for the most part. It was done with forks. And then when it was dry enough, it was made into those cocks. And when those cocks were made then, to make sure they didn't blow away, they made ropes. They had a thing in their hand called a twister for winding the ropes, and the ropes were made from the hay itself. From the butt of the cock they were made. One person let the rope out and the other twisted it, and then that was put over the cock to keep the wind from blowing it away. On the right here is Duffy's old workshop. Here, pump sticks were made by the Duffys for anybody having a well and wanting a pump. Those sticks had to be bored with augers to have a hollow down the centre of them from which the water would be pumped up. And they also then had the skill of being able to divine where water would be and tell you how deep that water was on the ground for the pump. Then of course, among other things they made coffins here as well. The people of Rosemount always had a great reputation for work. They had a great work ethic. They were either farmers or tradespeople. In 1958, a creamery was set up in Moat, and that they invited the farmers to send their milk to them. And so the farmers from the area, many of them started selling milk. It was a big job and very labour intensive because initially a lot of them would not have milking machines. So they had a lot of work to do. And then when they had the milk ready, they had to build a stand on the road like this, where they'd put the containers of milk for the lorry to collect. It was a lot of hard work, but it lasted forever. And a side effect of that was the creamery gave a lot of employment to boys and girls, men and women from the area as well. Down on my right, at Joe Keen's, is the Tumdoo River. The Tumdoo River had two factories on it before and during the famine. There was one on the far side, on the right bank. That was a tannery owned by Evans. The one on this side, the left bank, was owned by Shields. It was a mill. We're now on the old Midland Great Western Railway. This was a railway built in famine times. It brought a lot of employment at that time to the people of the area. It was opened officially, passing through Moat, on the 15th of August, 1852. It was a great mode of transport for people getting to Dublin, some people getting to work. It was also used very much for the transport of cattle. The great fairs, Moat became a great fair because of it. It was easy access to Dublin, to the Dublin market. For the locals, it was a big source of employment too. Many worked on the railway, so many worked in Moat Station, and so it has a special place in the memory of our people. It was a big project. There were 600 horses in the area working on that when that was being done during the famine times. And so many of our people made their livelihood in that short period, in that difficult time, working here on the building of the Midland Great Western Railway. An important feature of the line is the fine stone bridges, which are a tribute to the skilled labour force then available. When completed, it gave regular employment to those working at the stations and those maintaining the railway line. Now that it is no longer used for trains, the line has been converted into what is known as the old rail trail, which is now a marvellous facility for cyclists and pedestrians. That was the history of Rosemount, the great story of our past, of our people who made us what we are, of our culture, our heritage, and all those things that we are now so proud of.